four things I want to share with you tonight. Number one, the future is sometimes an uncertain and even a terrible thing. That's pretty positive. I have a friend who's a pilot, and I guess in even training, they define flying as hours and hours of sheer boredom interrupted by brief moments of sheer terror. Sometimes that's a good description of life. We love to get into routines, and we are creatures of habit. And we will suddenly be coasting and very comfortable, maybe even bored, and then you'll encounter those moments of brief terror, sheer terror in life, and everything is turned suddenly, totally differently. Maybe there are little explosions along the way that happen in our relationships, that happen in our finances, in our health. Just a year ago, I was in the Oval Office just about this time, a happy occasion, with my family with me. Normally I was answering to the boss, and this was kind of like after hours. And I was introducing the president to my sons, Shannon and Scott. And my wife Miriam was with me. We had a new little baby, just a few weeks old. And the president took Joshua in his arms, and he was deeply moved all of a sudden. And he started talking about how tiny, how fragile, and how vulnerable. So I was at my desk just a few hours later. I knew the president had left our little meeting to make an announcement to the press, and it was covered by network television, but everything was always covered by network television, and every announcement was always important, so I hadn't thought much of it. And then I heard the announcement that he had decided to send 200,000 American troops. It was the first go-around into Saudi Arabia, and set into motion the events that led to Desert Storm. Then I realized what was going on when he was holding Joshua in his arms. He was about to make that announcement, and he felt in his own mind he was sending tens of thousands of young American men to their death. It turned out differently for America, but tens of thousands of Iraqis were about to be sent to their death. The future is a terrible thing, and it's a very uncertain thing. Disraeli, the great British Prime Minister, said the only thing you can count on is uncertainty. But I just came back from Europe just this last month. All the bookstores all across Paris were filled with a new book by Jacques Rousseau, which was just so weird, an old manuscript they had found several years ago, and they couldn't read his writing. So they had all of these experts poring over the manuscripts, and then someone got very wise a few months ago, and they began to work some of their findings into a computer. And the computer sped up the process in a matter of weeks. They had the whole job done, and so suddenly, Jacques Rousseau, after all these years and generations, had come out with another bestseller. And you read the pages, and it's so relevant. And it's Jacques Rousseau is the man who told us that everything is always changing and everything is always the same. I took my kids on tours of castles, and we would walk those cobblestone roads and narrow little streets where the ox car couldn't make a U-turn, and suddenly imagine that we were there in the Middle Ages, and so thankful that we live in a day that has flush toilets and telephones and Nintendo, and so they could allow you to take vacations and see how people used to live. But everything's changing. And everything's always staying the same. I mean, in the Middle Ages, you didn't own your property. You rented it from the Duke. And every month you had to make payments to the Duke to use that little piece of property and to grow what modest crops you could grow. And if you failed to make a payment, you lost that property. And you rented a cow or a pig, or if you were lucky enough to have a cow on loan from the Duke, you had to make payments every month. You could do anything you wanted. You were free to make milk or cheese or take what you could from this poor cow as long as you made your monthly payments. Today we have paper, and we've done all these wonderful things on paper, and you can get a piece of paper and put your name on it, and it says you own your house. You are the owner of your house. It's your house. And you don't make payments to the Duke. You make payments to the bank. The bank makes payments to the Duke. And you don't have a cow. today. You have a car, and you have a piece of paper that says you own the car. When a policeman stops you for speeding, he wants to see your papers to see, do you own this car? And you show him the papers, and he can look at it and read, and he can see, yes, you own this car. This is your car. But you have to make payments every month to the bank, or you'll lose that car. And the bank makes payments to the Duke. So everything's changed, and everything is the same. And they've created things. They have life insurance on a piece of paper, and it says that this is real special. If you die, it's okay, that the house will be paid off, and your wife can live in the house. But things never change. You still pay taxes to the Duke. And he protects you from your enemy. And the taxes increase because, among other things, the Duke can print money with paper, too. Instead of gold, just money. And it says on there, I am money. I'm real. But he can print all kinds of that money with paper. And he has to take more taxes because its value is less. And the chances are your wife is still going to have to move in with a family somewhere, or into an apartment, or sell the house and move into a cheaper condominium, even with that piece of paper called life insurance. Rousseau said, man was born free, but everywhere he is in chains. Break out of that cycle, the cycle that we're in, the cycle that our ancestors were in, the cycle that people have always been in. Only a few people have ever been able to break free, and the rest of us have always served them. And we've already seen people go before us. We've seen them climb out of this mess to find a window or a door, and suddenly they're out, and we can see that they're out, and we know that it works. And all the other businesses and enterprises we're in, they change the rules. And just when somebody we know gets there, there's a new law, a new rule, and it's taken away. Here we've seen it. We know these people. We've stayed in their homes. We've driven in their cars. They've gotten out. They've made it. They've broken the chains. They're free. The future is a terrible and uncertain thing. But number two, I want to share this with you. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be. The more information you have, the better your education, not necessarily formal education. The more you know, the better you will be. And the better your chances to break out of this cycle. One of the president's close friends and one of my friends was Lee Atwater. He was the president's chief political advisor and a talented young man. He was the chairman of the Republican National Committee. I remember a human interest interview, and they asked him, what are you going to do now? You've done it all. You've elected a president of the United States at 38 years of age. And Lee said, I believe life begins at 40. That your first 40 years are just an education, just preparation. You can't even decide what you want. You don't even have the ability to choose what you want until you're in your 40s. Then you know enough about life to be able to set your direction. And he had great ambition. Lee had 2 books that sat on his desk that were his Bibles. And one, The Prince by Machiavelli. And he loved that book and was always quoting Machiavelli, who was very controversial in the 16th century because he had written a book that talked about politics totally separate from any ethical consideration. But there's a lot in The Prince, actually, that's useful, a lot in that book that isn't even Machiavellian. Machiavelli believed that all men are governed by the same passions, and that if you understand those passions and understand the context in which a person is living, you can predict exactly what he'll do in any given set of circumstances, and you can exploit that knowledge. The other book was The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which was written 2,500 years ago. Oliver Stone's cinematic masterpiece, Wall Street, talks about the art of war. This is the only book you need to be a success in business in America, they say. And Sun Tzu wrote this 2,500 years ago, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you don't have to fear 100 battles. You're equipped. Both of these books had in common the same emphasis on knowledge, on intelligence, on information about people, about their circumstances, about how they act. in a given set of circumstances. Lee Atwater believed life began at 40, but Lee Atwater died at 39. The last year of his life, struck down by a stroke, he discovered the Bible, which became his third and then his most important book. The whole last year, he devoted his time to reading and studying the Bible, particularly the Proverbs of Solomon. And there, ironically, was this same theme, this time with a moral underpinning. Solomon said that wisdom was like a jewel that had to be sought out and treasured. Solomon said, above everything, get understanding, knowledge. One, the life and the future can be an uncertain, sometimes a terrible thing. Two, the more you know, the better prepared you're going to be. And three, the third thing, but in the final analysis, it's what you do that makes a difference, not what you know. All my life I was hearing, the truth will set you free, and seeing it on slogans and even speaking about it myself. The truth will set you free. They said that Gandhi had said it, that Jesus had said it, and that Buddha had said it. And I never found that, I never found Gandhi once having said that, or Jesus or Buddha. He never said the truth will set you free. And it isn't true. It won't. There's truth all around us, and there are men and women in chains. Truth won't set you free. After Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, tens of thousands of slaves remained in slavery. There was an army between them and this great truth. And even afterwards, thousands remained in slavery for several years in this country. People who couldn't read in rural, isolated spots. The truth may be that you're no longer a slave, that it's illegal. But if you don't know it, and you can't read it, and you eat the same slop, and you live in the same shack, and your hands and feet are in chains, you aren't free. This is what Jesus said. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You've got to know truth. You've got to know it. You've got to act on it. You've got to do something. Truth lies all around us. Moliere said that all men are alike in their dreams, and all men are alike in their promises. It's what they do that makes a difference. And what about us? The opportunity we have to anticipate the future, the uncertain things that can happen to us and the people we love and our families, our children. The knowledge we have, the advantage we have, tasting and experiencing. The retail industry is reeling. They know. They see the television networks ahead of them who've gone the same way, who are broken up by the rise of the cottage industry and the tremendous diversity that has come to television. There aren't 3 channels anymore. And retailing is beginning to feel the changes that were predicted long ago by retailers themselves. 20 years ago in London and New Delhi in the United States, a series of conferences were held by futurists and accountants and bankers and sociologists trying to anticipate the next generation. Among other things, they knew that in one lifetime, if you can imagine this, in one single lifetime, a generation had experienced and seen the mass production of the automobile. They'd literally gotten off a horse and gotten into an automobile in one lifetime. Radio and television and the advent of nuclear power and outer space exploration in one lifetime. And these futurists were trying to anticipate how the world would change and what had already taken place in our lifetime. It would change the face of the earth. And they came to the conclusion that there were 2 things, optic fibers and the silicone chip. And they were already here amongst us. And forever the world would be different. There are even great writers who spoke about it. John Naisbitt, he wrote a book called Megatrends. Everything was going to be different. They spoke about some fictitious night, evolutionary night, in which we were all asleep and our telephone slips off the cradle and stretches across the living room, dragging its body behind it, and hooks up with the personal computer, portable personal computer, and moves over to the television. And at that moment, the educational and economic future of the world turns with this step, when the telephone, the television, and the computer become one. It's already here. The government subsidizing it in France gives students a Minitel as soon as they graduate, and it's there at home. The future is here. The future is here, and we know that we're a part of the future. When I first talked about this, there were a handful of television stations, and I talked about the tens of thousands of opportunities that would be available through the telephone and computer. And now already they print these great big thick books every month to let you know what's in the air, what we can pull down. But they tell us that the time is coming when there'll be every kind of television opportunity. That we are the last generation that will ever call the television the idiot box. Education will be transformed. We have already some of the crude little instruments and some of the software that's the prototype of how our lives will be run. Most of us have seen at some time or other Typing Tutor. And if you've never known how to type, you can learn how to type. And sit down with this very simple but very sophisticated software. And sit down and start typing. And it will quickly catch on to who you are and what you don't know. And it will tell you what to read again and look at and where to put those fingers. And then it will slowly introduce one letter after another until you feel comfortable, always making you stretch. Just when you know where to go, it will add one more, taking you away and bringing you back, and taking you away and bringing you back until you're comfortable with some of the letters, and then moving you on to others, constantly stretching until the letters that were hard are now the easiest. And it brings you back to the old ones. And then words, 3-letter words, and then 4-letter words, and on you go, and then sentences. And all of a sudden, in a few weeks, you're typing. In a few days, you can match a 6-month typing course because of the sophistication of this very simple program that keeps track of who you are and where it's taking you and where you're weak and where you're wrong. In the future, when our children learn algebra, they'll learn it not just through numbers, but through bars and graphs and colors and police dramas acted out on screen to help them memorize complex formulas. And the computer will know what's wrong, what they don't know, what they've missed, what formulas need reinforcement, and will take them back wherever they have to go, never letting anybody stay behind, pulling them along step by step. We will feed into our computers who we are, where we want to go, and where we want our children to go to college, and what kind of cars we want to drive, and where we want to be financially, and what we want to weigh, and what all of it will be there. And the computers will be on automatic, making thousands of decisions that we make now, giving us even more free time. I know it sounds horrible. The future always sounds horrible, so sterile and impersonal and terrible. You aren't going to have to make some of the little decisions that you have to make today. They'll be made. Band-Aids will automatically be reordered. A lot of decisions will be done. And if you want to monitor everything, you can turn it way down low if you want, or way up high, and it'll stop you every time you walk in the living room. May we have a talk, please? trying to anticipate some things for Christmas. I noticed you were disappointed last year and overruled me 3 times on my Scotch tape orders. But this is the first time so many relatives came, and even for you it was unexpected. Is this going to happen again this year? I don't want to disappoint you. And you can talk about Scotch tape for an hour if that's what you want to do. But so much of our lives will be factored in, and so often we'll be able to do what we do with computers now. Just punch enter and move on to the next decision. Just punch enter. Go ahead. You order lunch. Terrible. You know, every new idea goes through 4 stages. Number 1, it isn't true. People never believe it's true. We've always been able to predict the future. The future has always lay around us. People have always known the future. And there have always been prescient people who could gather the evidence around and say, this is what it will be like. And nobody ever believes them till the last minute. Even bankers, especially bankers, don't believe it. They're still building train stations right up to the end. The city fathers are issuing bonds and building train stations and walking through multi-million-dollar marble floors and saying, this is where the barber shop will be, and here's the platform where the baggage will collect. Even when the futurists are telling us, don't build train stations. And now they're telling us, don't build shopping centers. And the bankers are still floating bonds and raising money. And up to the end, we'll be building shopping centers until there are societies organized to keep us from tearing them down. So we'll remember what it was like so we can take our kids there. That's what they tell us. But every idea goes through 4 stages. Number 1, it isn't true. The telephone, it isn't true. It can't happen. And then stage number 2, it's true, but it's not important or relevant. It's true. I went to the World's Fair, and I waited in this long line, and I spoke into the box, and there was someone in an entirely different room. It's not a trick. And I told them some things. There's no way they could have known what I was going to say. It worked. So someone in the other room heard me. I could hear them speaking. It is true, but there's a wire involved. I mean, it can happen, but it's unimportant. It's amazing what they can do, but it's irrelevant. What are they going to do? Run a wire from Los Angeles to New York? And can you imagine the lawyers it will take to do that? And the politicians it will take to do that? What if one farmer in Iowa says no? Or one cow eats the wire? A decision, an important decision about the government or about life and death is being made by doctors, and a child cuts it. It's risky, it's impractical. And who's going to decide who gets the privilege of speaking? And how long will the lines be? It will just be some gimmick for politicians. I mean, how can they get the right to lay the wire, the legal right? What are they going to do? Put wires to every city? Are they going to put wires up on poles so cows can't eat them? And have them running to everybody's little house? So yes, it's true, but 2, it's not important. It's irrelevant. It won't impact me. And the 3rd stage that any idea goes through is it's true and it's important. It's relevant. It affects me. But it's wrong. It's not morally sound. And there were all kinds of concerns about the telephone, as there was anything that was futuristic. There were sociologists who were saying that we were entering an impersonal age, and there were dangers, and that personalities would change, and that people would become hermits, and they wouldn't leave their house. They wouldn't talk over the back fence like they used to, and the lack of that interpersonal exchange was going to affect personality and relationships. And it was all right to have a telephone as long as you understood the rules that went with it. And you didn't become obsessed with the use of the telephone. Theologians said that it would increase lying because you couldn't see a person's eyes when you spoke to them, because you talked to them over the telephone. It's wrong. And that's the 3rd stage any idea goes through. It's morally wrong. It isn't fair. You aren't training a sales force. You aren't paying for carpet and air conditioning, and there's no overhead. You aren't paying for shipping and truckers to haul it around. This isn't sound. You're keeping all of this money for yourself. That's selfish, materialistic. You're a materialist. You should be at home watching television with the rest of us. So every idea goes through 4 stages. 1, it isn't true. 2, it's true, but it isn't important. 3, it's true and it's important, but it's wrong. And 4, it's true, it's relevant, there's nothing wrong with it, but so what? It's been around for years. The interesting thing is, we know the future. We know where we're headed. We know we'll be able to watch anything we want to watch, any sports activity or game we want to watch, live or 2 minutes delayed or 30 years delayed or the first Olympics. On video, we'll be able to watch it. We'll have thousands and tens of thousands of entertainment opportunities available to us. And someday the wives will all get the girls together and their daughters and take them shopping for sport, like men go shopping, go hunting for sport, and lay out in the woods for hours to feel those instinctive hunter urges to kill, and wonder what it must have been like when you had to do this every day, And daughters will say to their mothers, how did you know what to buy? How did you know how long the fragrance was going to last? And what you were buying, and how it would impact your health, and who made those decisions for you? And you'll tell your daughters, well, we just spray it on our arm, and we'd smell it, and we'd think, that smells good. How could you even tell it smells good? Who analyzed that for you? It was just on instinct, and we made good decisions sometimes. We didn't know these things. We didn't know any better. They'll explain how they shop, what it was like, and it'll be fun once or twice a year to go shopping. But that's what they tell us. It isn't true. Of course it isn't true. Or relevant. If it's true, it's bad. But it's coming. It's going to happen. Victor Hugo said, an invasion of armies can be resisted, but not an idea whose time has come. But the knowledge is there. You got to know the truth. You got to do something about it. So number 1, I'm done now. The truth, the future is an uncertain. Sometimes it's a terrible thing. Number 2, the more you know, the better prepared you're going to be. Number 3, it's not what you know that counts, it's what you do. And number 4, last thought I want to leave with you. Anybody can do anything if they really want to. These are conclusions I've come to from my experience in this business, my experience in politics and working for the president, seeing the great things he's done these last few years. Anybody can do anything if they really want to. Joseph was a slave and in prison. He didn't know the Egyptian language. He didn't know Egyptian law. And he became the prime minister in the world's great famine. It was Joseph who had amassed the greatest institutional fortune the world had seen up till that time, who opened his granaries and fed a dying world. But you can't feed a dying world if you're a slave. Moses killed a man. He was a murderer. And 40 years later, he came down from Mount Sinai with laws that still govern modern society. Napoleon, I just came back from France, and one of the places I spoke was on Vars, just not too many miles from Waterloo. Napoleon once said that every French soldier carries in his sack the baton for the Marshal of France. Anybody can do anything if they really want to. No wonder he believed. No wonder he didn't underestimate his own privates in his army. He wasn't born into a family of great wealth. He wasn't born into a family of great nobility. He wasn't even born into a family that was French. And at 26 years of age, he was leading the French nation into war. And at 30, Napoleon set atop the greatest empire the world had seen since Julius Caesar. Every French soldier carries in his sack the baton for the Marshal of France. Anybody can do anything if they really want to. Aristotle said, the future is like a wild animal that must be mastered. You got to reach out there and grab it. You got to take it. You got to conquer it. What about you and me? What about our lives? And why are we here? And what are we going to do? God didn't create us to live our lives in fear. And He didn't create us to live our lives with regret. And He didn't create us to live our lives in humiliation or in defeat or in shame. He created us to do something significant, something great with our lives, not just to be born and to live and sweat and die. He could have had us born dead. He created you to live. So live. He didn't create you to watch television. He created you to be on television. There isn't time. There is barely time for us to do the great things we were put here to do. Longfellow said that life is like two ships crisscrossing in the ocean in the middle of the night, and a lantern is held up, and there's some polished wood and some brass moving by, and the flap of a sail, and a face, the sound of a voice, and then we're plunged into darkness. King David of Israel said that life is like cut grass blowing across a field. You can smell its fragrance, you can see it in motion, and then it's gone. There isn't time to fear, and there isn't time to regret, and there isn't time for self-pity. There's just enough time to reach out and grab tomorrow and do the things you were put here to do. And then it's over, and then it's gone. Joseph, a slave, can feed a hungry world. If a corporal can carve out a great empire, if Moses, if a killer, can give us the 10 Commandments, anybody, anywhere, from any social standing, within any amount of money or any start, can do anything they really want. They have the desire. Molière said, we're all alike in the way we dream. And we're all alike in the promises that we make to each other. The difference is what we do. It's what you do that makes you an individual. It's what you do that makes you unique. It's what you do that makes a difference. Solomon said, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might.